Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about Senate Democrats support Antifa. Author Mike Gonzalez joins me to talk about his new book, The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free, and protesters sue Seattle for a fair fight. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Today in the First Five, I just want to briefly describe to you a hearing that happened yesterday in the United States Senate and involved a senator from the great state of Texas, where I'm from, Senator Ted Cruz. The hearing, which he had called, was before a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a subcommittee called Subcommittee on the Constitution. And he, Senator Cruz, had entitled the hearing, The Right of the People to Peaceably Assemble, Protecting Speech by Stopping Anarchist Violence. He basically reviewed the mayhem in the streets of America, the mobs, the destruction, the property destruction that's been occurring really for weeks now, since the May 25th death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and was describing this as, Ted Cruz described this as terrorism, which actually suppresses the free speech of other Americans because everyone else is afraid to speak up. So he held this hearing. The little clip I'm asking Matt the Wonderful to play for you was what happened at one point in the hearing when a Democrat senator decided she was not going to listen to all this anymore. Here you go. Here is Ted Cruz.
So I hope this is the end of this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and that we don't have to listen to any more of your rhetorical speeches. Thank you very much. I'm leaving.
Well, I appreciate the, as always, kind and uplifting words of Senator Hirono. And I would also note that throughout her remarks, she still did not say a negative word about Antifa, nor has any Democrat here. They instead engage in a political game where they depend. You're welcome to say something negative about Antifa right now.
I think that I've covered the subject quite well. You are not listening.
Okay, she declined to speak, so that is the position of the Democratic Party. I would note also that of the 7 Democratic senators who spoke, not a one of them apologized for or denounced multiple Democrats calling law enforcement officers Nazis, stormtroopers, and Gestapo. To be fair, I don't have.
I wanted to play that just to point out that I think Senator Ted Cruz is doing a great service for America. I know I have political friends. Actually, truly, this is a true story. I have political friends. Obviously, many of my friends are conservative, but some very much on the left. And many people simply do not want to connect the dots between the violence we're watching in the streets of America, the violence conducted by Antifa, the violence engaged in by the Marxist Black Lives Matter movement, the destruction of property, burning cars, smashing windows, stealing, robbing, in fact, actually killing people. People on the left actually do not see a connection. They can't connect a dot between the violence they see and the Democrat Party, even though most of this is happening in cities where led by Democrats. Most big cities have Democrat mayors, very unwilling to tamp down on any of the violence, very unwilling to condemn the violence as unjustified, unproductive, dangerous, and as the point of Senator Cruz's hearing was, unwilling to point out that all of this very aggressive conduct by Antifa and Black Lives Matter is really crushing the rights of other American citizens to speak, to participate, to be involved at all. Everyone's afraid and they're just silenced. So I think that Senator Cruz did a great service really to help America connect those dots, because he's pointing out you couldn't get one Democrat senator on the House subcommittee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, the subcommittee on the Constitution, couldn't get one of them to say one word in condemnation of the conduct of all of the riots of Antifa, Black Lives Matter. Couldn't get them to say a word. So he made that point very well. I think the hearing was worth it just to have that. And also the hearing was worth it to again help the American people who are paying attention to understand the degree and level of violence. If you're not tuned into media as often as Some people are. You may not realize just how violent and dangerous the city streets have become. And you also may not realize, because much media attention was paid early on to all of this violence, but the media has really cut back on covering it. In fact, you'll hear Americans say, well, I think that's kind of all settled down. I think and it hasn't. These riots have been going on, still ongoing, Portland, Seattle, other major cities. And I think it really is an important thing to keep in the public eye as we head in the fall election season, to understand who's trying to maintain law and order and who's willing to let the destructive behavior of Antifa and Black Lives Matter not only continue to go on, but continue to go on without any condemnation or denouncement at all. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. As you heard at the start of the show, I have a guest joining me. I want to show you, I got his book. This is a guest who's from Heritage Foundation. And I'm going to hold up his book to show you, because I forgot to send Matt the Wonderful this book. But the book is called The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. This is the book. I got it actually very quickly delivered to us from Amazon. You can get it there too. It's a really great book. And I want to take a moment to introduce the author who is joining us, and then we'll talk about his book. But the author is someone who's with the Heritage Foundation. He's a senior fellow of the Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy and the Angeles T. Arredondo E Pluribus Unum Fellow. I love anything with E Pluribus Unum in there. Love that. So he is with Heritage Foundation, but a very quick background about him. He really has quite a worldly background that is important, I think, in the issues we're going to be talking about. He spent close to 20 years as a journalist, 15 of them reporting from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And he joined the Heritage Foundation in 2009 as a vice president of communications and became a research senior fellow in June of 2014. But the really cool thing about his background in life, this Mike Gonzalez was born in Cuba, left at the age of 12 in 1972. He's also lived in Belgium, France, Spain, Hong Kong, and South Korea, and has spent months living in and reporting from Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Panama, and Cyprus. I could keep on reading his resume, but obviously very worldly, very accomplished person. He holds a bachelor's degree in communications from Boston's Emerson College and an MBA from Columbia Business School, fluent in Spanish and French, and he also reads Italian and Portuguese. And this is his second book, The Plot to Change America. And that is what we're going to talk about with him today. So, hello, Mike Gonzalez.
Well, Debbie, you're very kind in your introduction of me. I'm very happy to be on with you. And I tell you that your state, Texas, really does hold a special place in my heart. I love it there every time I go there. And so I want to say thank you to all your listeners as well.
Well, that's great. I love Texas too. And I will tell you, I'm a native New Yorker, but don't tell anybody. I grew up in New York and practiced law in California for a long time. So we've moved around too, but not quite as internationally as you. But yes, we love Texas. We would never leave. Well, I'll tell you, I want to get into this book right away from the perspective that I think many Americans have come to accept, without realizing why, that politics are inherently and irrationally tied to identity, that people make assumptions that politics somehow are rooted in or in the bloodstream. And so we have identity politics just prevalent in America. We have assumptions made about racial and ethnic groups because of particular background. You're assumed to hold particular political views. So I love that you are jumping on in this book, starting to talk about how do we get here? Where did this come from that we have this thought? Because actually, it's, as I pointed out many times in my show, completely irrational that your beliefs on any subject should be tied to your skin color, race, or ethnicity. But yet identity politics are so prevalent. So would you start, please, by telling us, what is the historic source for this in America?
Well, first of all, I want to say that what you just said, you're the first interviewer who puts your finger on that. Yes, this idea that ideas and thoughts and behaviors are inherent in our DNA is actually quite ugly. And this is something that has now become the currency of our politics. And in fact, I call it the cultural software of our culture. It is the way we do everything now, this idea that we are representatives of whatever group the government has put us in because the government has created these groups. Now, if you want to know when it started, when did we begin? Really, we have to go back to the 1920s and Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist leader, who realized, wait a second, the worker is not rising anywhere. Marx promised that the worker was going to rise all the time and overthrow the bourgeoisie, but that this is not happening. It's happened only in one place, a backwater part of Europe called Russia, but it didn't happen in Germany, Italy, or anywhere else. So Gramsci says, well, the reason why is because the worker has bought into the ideas of his oppressor, of the bourgeois. He has bought into the family. He has bought into the nation. The worker's patriotic. He's bought into religion. He has bought into the economic system. So what we have to do is drive these ideas from his brain with consciousness-raising exercises, with struggle sessions, which you see today, by the way. I can go into that later if you want me to. Then, so Marxism actually kind of transforms from economics to culture, and then we have a second iteration of this come in the 60s, in which the worker himself is replaced as the locus of rebellion and replaced by groups, identity groups, at first based on race and ethnicity, then sex, sexual orientation, gender, even disability status, anything that confers a feeling of resentment or victimhood, which can be used by the members of said group to claim attention, respect, reward, compensatory justice, etc. You can tell right away why this is such a bad idea, that's such a bad way to order society.
It is a bad way to order society. You know, it is related to the point you're making. I have heard others argue that, you know, America had the communists coming to America in the 1920s, and they were trying to sell the just pure economic Marxism, and there were just many people. You're making the point, I guess, in the same way, I guess, but many people who thought, why would we want to change the economic system in America? It looks pretty great to us. I mean, we have opportunity, we have prosperity, we have the potential and ability to advance. So what is it you're knocking about America? And so they had to find like another intellectual manipulation of people. So they said, okay, you know, it isn't just that we're selling economic Marxism, but they had to find a new way to get people to undermine their love of and respect and reverence really for America. So they chose this race, ethnicity, national origin thing. Does that gel with what you're saying?
Oh, completely. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Herbert Marcuse, who is a member of the Frankfurt School, a German-American academic who is very influential in this country in the 60s and 70s, he said himself, you know, capitalism is too successful. It does produce a good life. The worker is the American worker is an idiot who's too happy with his car, his hi-fi, his refrigerator. He is useless. He's never going to rebel. So then another thing he says, and I'm quoting him directly, he says, liberation depends on the consciousness of servitude. In other words, you have to go out and teach people how bad they have it. You have to fill them with resentment. Yes. Then they become the agents of revolt and rebellion. And why doesn't economics work? Why doesn't economics work? For the reason you said, you can change your economic station. If you strive, if you believe in yourself as an individual, as a father, as a mother, as a member of your family, that you're going to do the right things, you know, follow the success sequence, work hard, be punctual, and do all these things, you will become wealthier. You will rise in economic station, but you can never change your sex. I'm sorry to bring it to you. You can never change your race. You can never change your country of origin. These are things that are immutable. So let's base resentment not on economic stations, but on these things that can never be changed.
Absolutely. And, you know, I love, this is such a great discussion to have, because part of what this accomplished, this whole effort of Gramsci, Marcuse, what that accomplished is it established groups in society, and they're in America, very sensitive, very tender things. So once those are established and we're celebrating, you make allusion in one of your articles, the idea how we're celebrating diversity, and everyone's afraid to comment at school, and when they go back to school night and they see their kids' teacher right out of board a slogan like, diversity is our strength or some other, gobbledygook that doesn't really mean anything. But people are silenced by identity politics, or silenced by that celebration of inclusion, because the implication is if you aren't part of celebrating, if you're not kind of on board, you maybe have some questionable views and beliefs about other people. It's a brilliant strategy to silence the opposition. You agree?
Oh, and this again, Marcuse writes an essay in 1965, which he calls repressive tolerance. Obviously, this is a contradiction in terms, but what he's saying in this essay explicitly is that society needs only to tolerate leftist views. That if you come with a conservative view, it cannot be tolerated. It must be driven from the marketplace of ideas. So this is what we're seeing implemented today. A professor was fired today because he mildly criticized affirmative action. So this, I want to make a distinction for your listeners here. America has always been multi-ethnic. From the very beginning, America was multi-ethnic. That's why the founders in 1776 created the motto, "E pluribus unum," out of many one. They understood that the nation they were forging had to have a feeling of common interests, that they had to be in it together, that they had to revere the founding documents and the ideals of the founding documents. So America has always been multi-ethnic, and I don't have a problem whatsoever, nobody should, with celebrating where your grandmother's from or where your grandfather's from, or celebrating the language they spoke around the kitchen table, or liking grandmother's cooking. I am myself a Cuban American, as you said. I like smoking cigars once a week, not just because I actually like to smoke cigars, but because I think I'm communing with my ancestors who actually grew tobacco in the 1700s. So, these are things that are quite healthy, actually. It is when you're hemmed into blocks, into things that are artificial, into things that were created by the government, and then filled with resentment against the country, so you will change the country. That I very much have a problem with.
Could not agree more. And these are really vital conversations to have, because I kind of live my life in politics. Happily so. I get very involved in political campaigns. I get very involved and I do a lot of public speaking, and I do a lot of talking to people about the issues facing us and how we resolve them, and try to urge people to think along the lines of every challenge we have as Americans, we can resolve as Americans using a system established by our founders, using a system that is designed to encourage the idea that robust debate of ideas, the First Amendment, the brilliance of robust debate of ideas and all that. But this identity politics shifts the conversation from, what is the proper use of border walls, or what is the proper use of right idea of border security, or the right idea of citizenship or immigration. Every issue, if you're coming at politics from this very divisive identity politics, it just simply becomes a question of, do you agree with the hyphenated group that is asserting this, or are you a racist? It's been tremendously effective. And I think that there are, though, and your book is going to do a brilliant job to help this. I want to talk about your book more, but it's helping Americans start to see we can't continue like this. We can't resolve anything. You can't get to order. You can't get to progress if all you're going to do is have a dictatorial assertion about what you must believe, or else we're going to call you racist, and then move forward on ideas. And I think our body politic, and I actually think the American people are getting kind of tired of this. Did you sense that in your writing and research of the book, that people are recognizing it and not willing to put up with it as much as they have in the past?
Well, I want to say a couple of things. The first one is, bless you for talking about the founding ideals. One of the reasons why I am hopeful is because every time we had tried to solve a problem in America, whether it's the revolution, whether it's slavery, whether it was Jim Crow, we have done so by aspiring to the ideals that all men are created equal. So that helped us in the revolution, obviously. Then it helped us in the Civil War. Lincoln actually wrote that he thought Jefferson had put in those words for him, waiting for a man to come along to resolve the issue of slavery. Then when we had the 100 awful years of segregation, of Jim Crow, again, we look up to all men are created equals. Martin Luther King comes to the mall in 1963 and says, we're here to cash this promissory note. What is that promissory note? It is the promissory note of all men are created equal, endowed with a creator with unalienable rights. I think right now we can solve this issue of identity politics, again, by lifting our gaze towards those ideals. All men are created equal. There are no inherent values. Ideas don't inhere in your DNA. Now, sorry, what was the second thing you said? Because I really also wanted to address that.
Okay, that's not a fair question because I'm just talking. Let's see. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Well, while we're waiting for it to come back to one of us, I did want to hit one point in your book I thought was really, really interesting, is that and I know that I respect the Heritage Foundation is nonpartisan, and so I'm not asking you to take sides politically, but there have been assertions by people in the American political scene that demographics is destiny, is the point they make, and essentially that because America is demographically, statistically likely to become, they use the expression majority minority by whatever year it is, 2040, that the idea that, well, then, there will be just absolute adherence to leftism in this country because the demographics are destiny and everybody knows that everyone who's a member of a hyphenated group is going to end up supporting more leftist ideas, which I think is a racist assertion. But you talk about that a little bit in your book and how that has been manipulated and developed by people they're really arguing for leftism, but they're saying it's inevitable because of race. And so tell us that that's not true, okay?
Okay, so two things. Now I remember what you said before. You talked about whether I am seeing whether Americans are actually pausing and saying, hang on. The very reason I wrote my book is to shed light on all of this, to show our fellow Americans, what has happened, because people don't understand what has happened, who did it, how they did it, and especially why they did it, and how we can stop it. So that I expressly, and I do think that this is an inflection year, and not in the way liberals think it is. This is an inflection year in that many Americans are beginning to say, what? They're looking at the TVs, not that CNN or the cable news or the networks ever show the mayhem in Portland, but they understand what is happening. So that's the first thing. On the demographics thing. So Debbie, I'm just going to take a point in our history. As I said, we have always been a nation of changing demographics. But during the Ellis Island period, we took in people from Armenia, we took in people from Greece, from Sicily, Jews from Eastern Europe. We took in people, Assyrians, Lebanese, great numbers of them. We did not think then of hiving them off into siloing them into minority status. We did not say, okay, you're going to be this minority, you're going to be this minority, and there's victimization attached to this status, and you're a victim and you should be aggrieved. No, we didn't do that. We did what no other country has ever done. We extended our hand and said, welcome. You're going to be American. If you come in here, you can be an American, but we have a creed. All men are created equal, endowed with a creator with unalienable rights. We have expectations. Men and women have equal rights under the law. Men are not superior to women, women are not superior to men. These are things that we accept in this country. And people could join the melting pot. We stopped doing that expressly for the reasons I've discussed from the 60s on, and then we started putting people into these minority groups and adding the grievance aspect to it. So we don't have to do this. We can go back to the old model. In fact, I think we should, and I think we will, and we can have, expect the demographers have this wonderful term called ethnic attrition. What it means is that somebody with a Korean grandmother or somebody with a Cuban grandfather, it really will just be a mainstream person. Will be an American and will have no feelings of marginalization unless they're being told constantly that they should feel marginalized. So that is a bad model, and we should discontinue it.
I love that. And actually, similar to what you're talking about, in America, in this election cycle especially, there's been the development of movements that are really tied to the ideas you're talking about. One is called Blexit, the Black and Latina Exit, and it is from one particular party. But the point of the founder, Candace Owens, and Brandon Tatum, is to say you're not assigned political beliefs because of your skin color. You should actually think for yourselves. You should think about what you believe in, and you should actually entertain and understand the facts of what kind of policies have blessed and uplifted America and what policies have repressed, divided, and impoverished America. And as they're able to do that, it is, I think, the scariest thing ever to the Marxist movement in this country is the idea that individuals are being of various ethnic groups are being inspired to think for themselves, to push back against this kind of siloing of people by their ethnicity and race. I think that's one thing I was getting at my previous question, which we both forgot momentarily, but is this idea that, yeah, you know, we are rising as individuals. We encourage people to think for themselves. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, yes, obviously, the founding documents, the whole idea of natural rights speaks in terms of individual rights. You know, individuals are endowed with by their creator with these rights. They can observe these rights in nature, and so the individual is the locus of these rights. But also the Christian tradition thinks in terms of individual salvation. There is no such a thing as collective guilt, which is what the left is trying to do right now, collective guilt. There's no collective redemption either. You have to save yourself, and that is the Christian tradition that actually stands.
Salvation. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
I said work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Yes. That's
right.
in the Bible.
So
yeah.
So I think that these two powerful currents in our society, the Christian foundations of the Judeo-Christian foundations of America, and also the founding documents, which emphasize the individual, is something that I think is something we should go back to, and not think in terms of collective groups again, which were artificially created by the government in the first place, and not think of us in terms of being minorities, majority. No, we're individuals. We're Americans. We come from, our ancestors came from many different lands. In my case, I came myself, but really, we're all in this together. We have solidarity with one another, and let's move forward with that.
Yeah, I love that idea of our ideas, instead of being our identity being rooted in the country our ancestors happen to come from. Our identity in America is rooted around and tied to, and is actually, the ideas of the founding of America. That's the national American identity, which is a beautiful thing, welcomes anyone of any background, any age, any skin color, race, ethnicity. Everybody's welcome to embrace the ideas of America. It's the only real way past the effort to continually silo people. I know we're almost out of time, but do you have, I want to talk 2 or 3 more minutes about the cancel culture. Do you have another minute?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, so you on this cancel culture thing, I think it's so interesting because you write so well, and I want to encourage people, we're listening in case you tuned in late. We're speaking with Mike Gonzalez, who's the Heritage Foundation. He's author of the new book, The Plot to Change America, and How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. One of the many great points made in the book is that identity politics didn't just happen organically. It's orchestrated, it's intentional in the effort to use identity as a means to push people toward a political viewpoint, and we need to reject it and accept the higher idea of being an American. But you're right about the cancel culture, and I actually had a list ready to run through with you, because I think it's important. We were talking about the robust debate of ideas, the First Amendment. The cancel culture has overtaken, to some degree, the media in America, and the ability of people to move forward, left, to progress, to speak freely. Because if someone decides they don't like you, or they don't like what you're saying, they can find something in your background, say, that's it, you are done. You have no place to speak. You have no platform. You have no respect. I had a bunch of cases, but you said at the start of this interview, there was one thing that happened today, and I don't even know what that one was. Could you tell us about that?
Well, no, unfortunately, somebody sent to me in an email. I read it very rapidly because I'm doing a lot of interviews. So it was a professor who was fired, and I forget at which university, because he actually very mildly criticized affirmative action. But let me go back to cancel culture, which you just mentioned. You know, cancel culture, the media has been awful about this, by the way. I'm a former journalist. These are my friends. My wife is a former BBC producer. Look what happened at the New York Times, James Bennett firing Barry Weiss, resigned, saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't work here. Look what happened in New York Magazine, Andrew Sullivan. These are all not conservatives. These are all liberals who said no more. We're either fired or left. Now, why? What is the origin of cancel culture? And I'm going to tell you, Debbie. Marxism attempts to do the impossible. Marxism, it is supremely a very vain attempt at changing human nature. Che Guevara said he was trying to build a new man, create a new man. But as you know, human nature is unchanging. If you read the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Bible, you look at figures like Ulysses, Achilles, Agamemnon, Sarah, Abraham, Moses, and what strikes you most about them is that they're just like you and me. Moses and Abraham and Sarah are just like you and me. They have envy, they have lust, they are irresolute. Look at Peter. Peter denies Christ 3 times. So when Marxists then fail, because they will fail at changing human nature, they must resort to coercion or violence. This is why every Marxist society has been coercive, because they have failed. And that is cancel culture. But I tell you, this is this is what gives me hope in the things that I do, why I get up every morning. Americans are too attached to liberty to put up with coercion. So I have that on my side.
Sir, I could not agree more. And this cancel culture, I'm out of time for today. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. I love your remarks and what you're talking about, the roots of the cancel culture. I think in this era where we have the Marxist movement very, very on fire in America, the Marxist movement trying to push away the ideas of the founding ideas of America, the founding assumptions of America, cancel culture fits right in with that. Just a no tolerance for anybody who dares to be to speak, to be who dares to disagree with us. And so college professors losing jobs, the average Joe losing jobs, the idea that there was a nursing, I mean, I have a whole litany of them I had organized, but one was a nursing instructor, a woman who's an instructor at nursing school, who lost her job for saying all lives matter. That kind of bridges it. A cancel culture tied in with the identity politics. That's it. That's an impermissible statement. All lives matter. And what an affront, really, to the idea of America that all lives matter is an evil, harmful thing that you're not allowed to say anymore at the risk of actually losing your job. Okay, so Mike Gonzalez, fabulous book. I'm going to show our listeners again. Order it on Amazon. Here it is right here. We have a funny screen here. Can't see which way I'm going. All right, this is the book right here. You ought to order it on Amazon, The Plot to Change America. And also to find you, Mike Gonzalez at Heritage, you can just look up Heritage Foundation, put in Mike Gonzalez's name, and up will come the articles he's written. He's a great writer and great thinker. And thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
No, it was really thank you very much. They can go to heritage.org/theplot, and that's where you'll find the book. You'll find many things about it.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you for writing, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Deb.
Okay, folks, I tell you, that is a very cool book. I mean, I read a lot of books, to decide what would be fun to talk with you about. It's just very, very, very intellectual, but very common sense. And I actually think it's kind of reassuring to people to realize that this whole identity politics thing, which seems to have just dissolved normal political conversation in America, it is not natural, it is orchestrated. It is not inevitable. In fact, it must inevitably fail because its ideas are just antithetical to the liberty that America really loves. So great book. Encourage you to get it. All right, one more topic for today. I found this the most amazing thing and really an insightful thing when you recognize how what must be in the minds of people in Seattle who would do this. But before I do that, I want to share one thing. I forgot to, in the first segment today, we were talking about Senate Democrats supporting Antifa. You couldn't get one Senate Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee of the Constitution to even say word one. You could not get them to say word one about Antifa's violence, the violence in the cities. You couldn't get them to comment about The Marxism underlying Antifa, Black Lives Matter, could not get them to. And I said the other day, and it's important to really recognize this, the left has always been careful, very, very careful. Even when Black Lives Matter activists engage in very violent actions, say very racist, ugly things, the American left, the Democrat Party in Washington, will not even acknowledge it. They pretend it doesn't exist. Very, very troublesome. Same way they did in the hearing with Antifa. They cannot, they will not. So, but where we are now with the Democrats in this country, they not only can never question Black Lives Matter, even though it's openly Marxist, and its mission, as stated on their own website, is very destructive of the idea of America. But you cannot get a member of the Democrat Party in the US Senate or House to criticize Marxism. You can't get them to say, America's not a Marxist country. We don't want Marxism here. We are not a socialist country. We're not a communist country. We're not a Marxist country. Not one Democrat in the entire Washington establishment will, in this time, in this era, in 2020, will even denounce socialism, communism, and Marxism. They won't do it because it is denouncing their base. It's so important to understand the Democrats have come to realize that obviously the Democrats have always needed the black voting base to win. They need the Marxist voting base to win. It is a very alarming time in this country to recognize how far left that party's been pulled, to the point their own leaders cannot denounce the most antithetical, un-American, evil ideas in this country. Socialism, Marxism, communism, they're all just a bunch of ugly isms. You can't get them to denounce it. But I did want to play, I sent Matt the Wonderful another clip. It's just a picture. I want to have him put this up, and I'll tell you, if you ever wonder whether the Marxist roots I'm talking about of Democrat leaders in this country is something new that sprang up in light of AOC winning or something like that, think again. Let me show you a picture. I want you to meet Warren Wilhelm. This guy, look at his picture right there, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Parents had to leave federal jobs because they were communist. He left college to go to Nicaragua in the 1980s and greatly admired the Soviet-backed socialist Sandinista. He returned to America and joined the Nicaraguan Solidarity Movement of New York, whose goal was to end capitalism and replace it with democratic socialism. When he married in 1994, he honeymooned in Cuba, said he is very proud of his Marxist work. He worked for both of the Clinton's campaigns. In 2001, he changed his name to Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. Maybe everyone knew this but me. I ran across this and I thought it must be fake. And so I actually researched. Bill de Blasio changed his name, took the name Bill de Blasio in 2001. Prior to that, an avowed Marxist, and he got elected the mayor of New York City. And you wonder why he cannot stand down, why he cannot stand up against the violence of the Marxists destroying his city, because he's one of them. The Marxist mentality has invaded the Democrat Party, and no one has courage, no one has the clarity to denounce it because it's who they are. Understand it. It's who they are. Okay, last story for the day. I want to get that in, but so back to Seattle. We had in Seattle, we've talked about this several times in the show. We had that area of Seattle overtaken by Antifa locking arms with Black Lives Matter. And they created what they call Chaz or CHOP. They had several names for it, but they basically took over a section of the city of Seattle. They pulled in barricades so that people could not enter that part of the city. They were claiming it as they were the sovereign leaders. No more. They were not part of Seattle, not part of the state of Washington, not part of America. It was a sovereign nation in their language, a sovereign nation they were creating. These are radical Marxists in Seattle. Finally, after weeks of America watching on television thinking, what is happening here? When is the city going to stand up for itself? The city had to abandon its police department. The police left. You had very little police control. You had the Marxist Antifa people blocking police and ambulance access even after shootings happened. You had people shot. You had one person murdered. This was not something that happened in a 12-hour period. It wasn't a temporary thing that Seattle wasn't ready for. It was weeks on end. So you finally have the city of Seattle say, you actually can't take over. This actually is a city. It's an American city. And we have an elected government, and we have citizens who pay taxes, citizens who are entitled to a sense of security living here, people who are entitled to have, safety in their community, have their businesses protected, have the police available to protect their businesses. I mean, you finally had the city stand up and say, you really can't do this anymore. So they had to break up these crowds. And these are not peaceful crowds who took over a public park and stayed there for a few days and waved signs about whatever they want to wave signs about. These are radical Marxists who took over blocks and blocks of an American city. And the Democrat leaders of that city and that state barely had the backbone, barely had the willingness to even stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, you really can't be doing this. They were afraid to stand up to Marxism. Understand, the Democrat mayors in our country are afraid to stand up to Marxism. But the story of today, I want to tell you, just so amazing and so enlightening, has to do with the fact that in Seattle, some of the protesters who were part of this madness of Chads or CHOP have filed a lawsuit in federal court. They have filed a lawsuit, and what they are saying in this lawsuit is that they need expensive protective gear in order to be able to be protesters, that their right, their First Amendment right to be protesters was inhibited because they didn't have adequate protective gear to protect themselves against the police who finally, after putting up with their taking over a segment of Seattle, finally the police had to say, you can't stay forever, you're going to have to leave, and finally had to shoot tear gas. The police didn't kill anyone in Seattle. The police had to shoot tear gas. They had to use other crowd dispersing mechanisms. And because the police had those at their fingertips, able to use, they were able to reassert control over this area and get rid of these crazy protesters who then, by the way, made their way down to Austin and other places around the country. But these protesters are suing Seattle, and their argument is it's not fair that they don't have adequate protective gear, so that when the police have to use tear gas or other types of ammunition, other types of non-lethal, not going to kill them, but non-lethal means to force them to move on, they are saying it's not fair that they don't have, so they either want the city to have to pay the taxpayers to have to pay for them to have protective gear. They want helmets and masks and all this junk so they can participate, continue to protest, or they want the court to order that the police can't use those kinds of means of fighting back against them. Police can't use tear gas, etc. Okay, it's almost unspeakable how crazy, but I want to spend a minute telling you just what this tells you about the Marxist movement in this country. And frankly, about the condition of the practice of law in this country, that they found a lawyer to file this. But in Seattle, if these people were hanging out at it, if they sometimes you have to get a permit of some kind. If they had a permit, if they're legally protesting, if they are using some park or some other place designated for protesting, and then the police fired tear gas at them, and then the police used crowd dispersing mechanisms, they might have a point. But that's not what happened in Seattle. In Seattle, as the entire nation saw, you had people burning buildings, burning cars, throwing rocks through windows, destroying businesses, destroying homes, stealing things from businesses, engage in violence involving one person dying and several being shot, until finally the city said, you can't do this anymore. We're going to have to send in. It wasn't just the city. The federal government sent in their troops and said, you can't do this anymore. You're not actually going to be able to burn down federal buildings and destroy property. So what these people, I want you to think about the mentality, where they're coming from. What they're saying is they have as much right as protesters as the police do, and they want to get the court to make it fair to them. So fairness in their view is, if the police are going to use tear gas or other crowd dispersing mechanisms to make them leave, that the court has to order, that in some way or another, they've got to make it a fair fight. So the protesters have to have equal, either the court has to order the police they can't use those techniques, or the court has to order that the taxpayers buy for all the protesters who want them, masks and gear and their own protection so they can withstand this. What they're saying is they're not, and understand this, they are not speaking up for the right to protest. The right to protest has not been inhibited. Everyone has the right to peaceably assemble and to protest under the First Amendment, and they have that right. They want protection for the right to destroy property, to steal, to take over an area of the city and declare it a sovereign nation, Chaz or Chop or whatever stupid name they come up with. They're trying to act like their idiotic attempt to take over, to claim sovereignty over an area in Seattle deserves equal protection from the court as the police have in their job to enforce the laws and and bring about peace, protect the citizens, protect the property of the people of Seattle. They think they're on a level playing field with the police. They think they're on a level playing field with America. They're saying we're just as important. We're sovereign. We're Chaz. We're Chop. We should have protection, just like the police give protection to the people of Seattle, to the businesses, to the homeowners, to the residents. Police protect them, so we get to have equal protection from a court to protect us in our attempt to destroy Seattle, to take over Seattle, to establish a sovereign nation, to establish a little jurisdiction that's ours. I mean, the insanity, but this tells you it's a window on thought, important for Americans to recognize. Antifa is not about peaceful protest to bring about change. Antifa is about the destruction of America. This lawsuit by these idiots, this lawsuit is based on the fact it presumes the idea that they have the right to engage in destruction of American property, destruction of American city, overtaking of a city, and the courts better protect them against those crazy police who actually might eventually make them leave. They were not fired upon with tear gas because they were peacefully and lawfully protesting. They were fired on because they were violent, and because after however many weeks it was, and they wouldn't go home, the police finally had to say, the federal troops finally had to say, enough is enough. The idea that this case, which should be laughed out of court, not just dismissed, laughed out of court, might actually be taken seriously by some court in Seattle is yet a further reason for extreme concern. The other story I was going to throw in, and I'll have to save for another day, but there was actually conduct by Black Lives Matter thugs, mafia type activity on the part of people in Louisville, Kentucky, where the Black Lives Matter people threatened local business owners to basically say, you can't continue running your business without doing the following things. They gave them a list of demands: how many people you have to hire who are African American, who you can be your vendors. It was how you conduct your business. This is Black Lives Matter trying to control businesses owned by people in Louisville, Kentucky to say, you have to do these things or else. And they use the F-bomb throughout their threats. They're basically threatening the right of business owners to exist unless they comply with what Black Lives Matter does. Just like you've heard stories about the mafia in New York City owning a block, owning an area. That's what Black Lives Matter is trying to claim. In Louisville, Kentucky, one Cuban business owner, probably many of them protested, one Cuban business owner just said, absolutely not. We're not paying you, Black Lives Matter, so that you won't attack our business. Not happening. We'll have to go back to that story later. We're out of time for today. As I close out every show, I tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. And so today on our show, we started out with the Senate Democrats support Antifa. Senator Ted Cruz holds hearings on constitutional rights of protesters and non-protesters. Powerful testimony on Antifa's agenda by ACWT guest, my show guest, Kyle Scheidler. It was a great testimony he gave. I'll have to have him on again and talk about it. He did a great job testifying in that committee. Antifa and BLM Marxism advocate for the overthrow of America under the Constitution. Not one Democrat senator would condemn Antifa. Not one Democrat senator would condemn Marxism. The harsh emerging realization of 2020 is the Democrat Party, is the radical left, is Antifa, is Marxism. Think that's an exaggeration? Consider Democrat Warren Wilhelm, communist parents, supported Sandinistas in Nicaragua, honeymooned in Cuba, worked on both Clinton campaigns, and in 2001 changed his name to Bill de Blasio, your New York City mayor. The mayor of New York City is essentially a communist, and law and order are disintegrating in New York City. And those two things are connected. And as for protesters suing Seattle for a fair fight, a new measure of moral insanity of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, Antifa Black Lives Matter brings a lawsuit to compel Seattle, Washington government to supply rioters with sufficient gear to resist tear gas and other police weapons and tactics, or else to prevent the police from being able to disperse them. Premise: they are justifiably at war with the police, and they must be equipped by the state to fight their violent war against the police. Police must always calibrate tactics to fit the situation, but Seattle and Portland experienced violent riots, not peaceable assembly, and police must be able to stop the riots and destruction. The lawsuit should be thrown out or laughed out without comment, but will it be in Blue Seattle? In Louisville, Kentucky, another test, Black Lives Matter engaging in mafia-style shakedown and protection racket. Immigrant businesses object. Will the Democrat governor get tough? We'll see. Blue governance is leading to chaos everywhere. Vote R everywhere. And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today. I'll remind you, I'm doing one show tomorrow. And then the following week, next week, I'm taking a week off. We're on vacation. I want to thank Matt the Wonderful, Real News PR, for making it possible for me to do my show while we're traveling. But I'm taking 1 week off, and then I'm going to be here tomorrow. Then 1 week off next week, and I'll be right back on Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, doing America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I will talk to you tomorrow.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you